cannot understand. They can understand. And where we have shared some of these results, people can affirm to it. When we got the boxes of photographs of 1956 of St-Kitts-and-Nevis, at that time, I didn't have time to look at it. We put it aside. And just only recently, we started scanning the photograph. To do that kind of piece of research, you have to come to St. Vincent, talk to somebody who is around in that 1956, and get some data from them in terms of what is the vegetation in that area. This building here, where was it in 1956? How far is it from the river? You need to get on the ground. Most of this research are not funded. They are things that we do because we are miserable. The current one that we embark on is about to be funded by the EU. The value is 500,000 US. If I send such proposal to any organization in the region, they say, Jacob, you have to be crazy. And the key issue here, look at the mathematical model for what land is left. That is arithmetic. That's no science. Anybody can understand that when we present that in Trinidad, everybody say, yes, we understand what you're talking about. And once that information goes to the public domain, that is where the ethics come in, the people will understand. I don't have knowledge in public education, but in the EU grant that we're expecting, we are supposed to hire a public relations specialist who will help us disseminate it to the public. The challenge is this: how much of our budget are we committed to process that knowledge, to understand? When you look at all those meetings, as the Honorable Minister from Antigua said, how much of that is devoted to information knowledge and information sharing? And we take information knowledge and information sharing as something that does not require resources. If it doesn't require resources, you just have to depend on Calypso once a year. And if it's not sung in Calypso, you will not know it. So the real challenge, and I'm very glad that I recently worked on a PPCR project, Climate Resilient Project in St. Vincent, in which we devoted 40% of the budget for data collection, data processing, and data sharing. And part of the mandate is that all the data collected for that project must be on the internet. And that is something new that is happening in the region now. Before, you don't have to share it. You don't have to disseminate it. Everything must be on the internet. Now, when the last minister who spoke said, where is this? We have paid for it. Do we have to pay to collect it? The answer is this. One of these days, I will bring the boxes of area photograph to St. Kitts and say, here it is, keep it in your archives. And there are several information like that we got because, as I said before, we're just miserable. I was in Antigua this last week. I said, okay, we want to do this for you. They didn't say, come and do this for us. And why I'm provoking the ministers today is that collecting this information, analyzing it, disseminating it must be a program funded. It cannot be left to I did all of this just to become a professor, not because I want to share it. But when the intention now becomes that, okay, and if I don't do it, let me tell you, if I don't do it, I still become a professor. We can go and do this for some China country, you get your professorship, but when you start looking at developmental challenges of a region that has supported you all the time, you must continue to seek how to do this. Who else can you help? Where else can you go? And that is the motivation. So I am glad that I provoke those thought process. The solution is that we must start paying attention to data collection in the United States. Some persons are hired to be looking at those satellite imagery every day. And look at what has changed. Look at what has changed. And we have no resources for that.
First of all, look at the background. well, we've had 3 years of work within COMEST on this topic of the ethics of climate change. First, we did it on the own initiative of the committee. This was between 2008 and 2009. And then in response to decisions by the governing bodies of UNESCO from 2009 and 2011. We find that there are, we may refer to 4 components of our activity. First, we produced a recommendation that was adopted by COMEST at its 6th ordinary session that took place in Malaysia in June 2009, that UNESCO develop a framework of ethical principles in relation to climate change. This was something that came out as I said, as an initiative of the committee on the basis of knowledge of the literature, consultation with different entities and institutions and people. But then, after we got this recommendation on the floor, there was a report that was produced and adopted by COMEST at its 6th ordinary session and published in 2010, which is available, on the ethical implications of global climate change. COMEST participation also in the 2010 study on the advisability of preparing a declaration of ethical principles in relation to climate change was a third component, a third product of our work. And now we have a COMEST report. It's a continuation of the work we've been doing in previous years, to be adopted by the 7th ordinary session 2011, that is this year, on an ethical framework for climate change policies. You see that there is a small, maybe not a very small difference in the way we frame the issues. Then we have the role of COMEST in UNESCO. Well, this is a committee, it's not a commission, it's not an intergovernmental commission, it's still a committee of 18 independent experts appointed in their individual capacity to advise UNESCO on the ethics of science and technology. Plus, there are 11 ex officio representatives of intergovernmental science programs and other relevant bodies. And our work consists in organizing meetings to engage expert communities on an open-ended and inclusive basis, to produce reports that are disseminated obviously with substantive conclusions, or so what we wish, and recommendations to inform the work of UNESCO. But now we come to the issue of ethics of climate change. Why study climate change in ethical terms? Responding to climate change raises issues of responsibility. This is why? Well, because the practical task of ethical analysis and reflection on climate change issues, first and foremost, lies in the identification and articulation of the ethical dimensions of climate change as they relate to causes and responses that fall within the domain of human agency and thus responsibility. So we would like to see who owes what to whom with regard to producing, sharing and using knowledge, mitigating emissions and enhancing sinks, adapting societies to current and possible future impacts. That is, these are all open questions. They have to be debated. They are being debated. They are being discussed all over the place. But we think that they are valuable and important questions. Aren't climate change responsibilities fairly obvious? Well, we've been already discussing this topic this morning. And obviously they are not. Among other things, because of the question that the minister was raising before. Climate change really challenges established ethical frameworks because of extended and dispersed causal chains, because of stretched boundaries of solidarity across time and space. Our actions affect territories and times too far away from our natural impulses that struggle in vain to assimilate them, or that flatly abandon the fight because we don't know how to do it. There are also tensions between equally plausible grounds for knowledge, tort, duty to help the vulnerable. All these things, these values, they really create tensions and very often conflictive. So we face actions, objects, processes, and consequences at such novel scale that the framework of established ethics can no longer contain them. The objectives of the work of COMEST are to study climate change in ethical terms in order to understand the specific ethical challenges posed by climate change in all its dimensions. It is identify emerging ethical issues, trying to understand why they are important to address. In the same thrust, we could thus not only start to articulate what it is important to address, why it is important to address certain ethical issues, but also how to start moving beyond the conventional elaborations and understandings of that importance. Clarify the principles, the established ones or new ones that can be applied. And here we find that in elaborating why it is important to address the ethical issues emerging from climate change, references to certain key ethical considerations already acknowledged in international documents could form part of the discussion as points to refer to as ethical considerations that are challenged or are undermined, and thus in need to be newly contextualized and or elaborated upon with relation to climate change, and also to develop an ethical framework to guide practical action. And of course, this is not easy, and I think we're going to have quite some discussion in these 2 days. It would be a comprehensive policy, relevant ethical framework that should be clearly articulated, the result of an inclusive approach that would make room for a diversity of considerations relevant in different parts of the world, but also one that would articulate what is ethically wrong or unacceptable with certain climate change responses and certain climate change policies. So that's why I say it's not easy, we all know that. The ethical implications of global climate change. Well, this is the report that was produced by COMEST. And in page 38, it is clearly stated that it can be stated unequivocally that climate change cannot be dealt with adequately and properly if the ethical issues discussed in this report are not highlighted, well understood, and taken into account in decisions about responses. The purpose of this report was therefore not to make climate change a new theme of ethics, but rather to make ethics a core and necessary element of any debate about climate change and its challenges. Ethics is not an optional add-on at the end of the policy process. No? It is intrinsic, it is inherent to the policy process. Crucial ethical issues, harm, respect for persons and life, justice, and there's a lot of talk about environmental justice and the need to deal with that, need consideration at every stage of the policy process. Also the idea that neither ethics nor climate change can be compartmentalized. No? They have to be analyzed as a whole set, as an integral set. And approach to principles has necessarily going to be pluralistic, cannot just take some principles and stick to them. We have to consider the diversity, the cultural diversity, the spatial diversity, the geographical diversity of the world. And finally, we're not going to say in conclusion, because this is an open question, we propose ethical questions for this meeting. Are there specific ethical challenges in the Caribbean? And this would obviously lead us into the regional analysis of vulnerability and resilience. Are there principles, particular principles to be promoted? Human rights, sustainability, precaution, polluter pays, differentiated responsibilities. What are the principles that come up from the Caribbean as being urgently needed to be considered in a broader scenario of exchange and debate? And are there special issues for practical action? Already we started with that this morning, but then we have to know more about what is the knowledge base that we have and that we need. Problems of mitigation, problems of adaptation. Those are open issues that we would like to converse with you in these 2 days. Thank you very much.
How do we enforce much of the proposals that you are indicating? Thank you very much.
Yeah. Of course, there is the risk of free rider problem. And of course, there is this idea of getting away with everything through dressing up certain areas of debate for the powerless to self-satisfy themselves or to consolate themselves. But I think that this has at least a different intention. It really works with and through the different international agreements that have already been produced by the international community. And we think that this is a very critical time in which a bottom-up approach is also very important. It's not just that governments, states that sometimes represent very little, they are not highly legitimate, make decisions that take this free ride on the troubles and the developments of other interested parties. But that here we have the possibility then of increasing awareness, increasing consciousness about the problems, trying to promote education of the population, education of very many different audiences, and at the same time put pressure and illustrate or inform decision makers of the nature of the problem, but not the technical nature of the problem. That for that there are other